The reason your life feels stuck isn't because you haven't done enough, it's because you've done too much. You've tried, you've pushed, you've sprinted through endless lists of must do, must achieve, must become, and now you're exhausted without knowing why. But Carl Jung knew. Jung believed the soul doesn't speak through action. It doesn't scream through your accomplishments, titles, or milestones. The soul whispers in stillness. And sometimes the greatest breakthrough in your life doesn't come when you do more, but in the moment you stop. Stop chasing. Stop fixing. Stop forcing life into a shape that was never meant for you. Just be. Just breathe. Just listen. In this video, we'll explore why doing nothing isn't failure. It's alignment. It's the deepest act of healing you can offer yourself when you finally stop trying so hard. You may think, if I don't act, my life will fall apart. But ask yourself, who is thinking that? Is it really you? Or a part of you? A frantic ego terrified of losing control? Jung asked this question again and again. He saw clearly that most of our suffering doesn't come from what happens to us, but from the ego's relentless attempt to override the natural wisdom of the self. The soul doesn't want you to do more. It wants you to come home. And sometimes coming home doesn't require another journey. It requires stillness. It requires you to sit down, to let silence do what your striving never could. Reconnect you to yourself. This is not a call to give up. It's an invitation to step out of the illusion of constant doing and step into the sacred space where your inner voice has been waiting. Let this video be a chair for your soul to rest in, a pocket of silence for your heart to breathe, a doorway not to move forward, but to return inward. And finally, remember. Stay with me until the end. What you'll hear may not be loud, but it might be the one thing your soul has been waiting for. Part 1. The lie of constant doing society taught you, do more to be more. As if your existence depends on your productivity. As if your worth is something you earn, not something you are. From the moment you were old enough to be measured, you were given charts, grades, roles, resumes, proof that you were doing enough to deserve belonging. And so, you ran, you strived, you performed, until one day you forgot what it felt like to simply exist. But Carl Jung asked a question that stops everything in its tracks. Who is it that's trying to do all this? That question, simple, devastating, reveals the core wound. It's not that you're lazy. It's not that you've failed. It's that your ego has been running the show, while your true self has been exiled in silence. Let's break this down. In Jungian psychology, the ego is your conscious identity, the part of you that knows your name, your story, your goals. It's the manager of your life. It helps you survive, achieve, and navigate the world. But the ego is terrified of the unknown. It craves control, clarity, and constant motion. It believes that as long as you're doing something, you're okay. But here's the catch. The ego doesn't know when to stop. Because stopping feels like death. This is the lie of constant doing. That your value increases with your effort. That rest is laziness. That silence is failure. That stillness is dangerous. But Jung saw the truth beneath the illusion. He believed that most of us are not really living. We are just defending ourselves from not existing. And doing becomes a shield. A frantic attempt to outrun the fear that without action, we are nothing. But what if that's the lie? What if all you're doing isn't keeping you alive? It's keeping you away from life. We have mistaken action for meaning, effort for identity, movement for purpose. But your soul doesn't need more motion. it needs alignment. Jung called this the false self, the version of you built to survive, not to be whole. A persona shaped by approval, expectation, and fear. And as long as the false self is driving, you will keep running, even when there's nowhere left to go. You will keep climbing, even if it's the wrong mountain. You will keep doing, even when your soul is begging you to stop. The tragedy is this: you may succeed and still feel hollow, because you've confused achievement with aliveness. Doing can be a gift when it flows from your center, but when it comes from fear, it becomes addiction. The addiction to proving, to fixing, to earning your right to be here. But Jung's work whispers another way. You are not here to perform your existence. You are here to remember it. You are not a machine. You are a mystery. And mysteries don't reveal themselves through force. They unfold in stillness. So the next time you feel the urge to do more, to justify your place in the world, pause and ask, who is the one trying to do all this? Is it yourself or your scared, overworked ego? Because true transformation doesn't begin with more action. It begins with one brave decision: to stop running, to sit in the discomfort, and to listen to what's been waiting beneath the noise all along. Well, part 2, surrender is not defeat. In a world obsessed with winning, quitting is taboo. We are taught that to surrender is to fail. To give up is to admit weakness. But what if that belief itself is what's keeping us trapped? Carl Jung proposed something radical. He said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. We hustle, we push, we perform. Not because we're strong, but because we're afraid. We mistake exhaustion for virtue, burnout for bravery. And when our body finally collapses, when our spirit begs for stillness, we call it laziness. But here's the truth Jung would whisper in that moment. You are not lazy. You were misaligned. Let's pause here. What is the difference between giving up and surrender? Giving up is rooted in despair. It's the voice that says, I'll never get there. I'm not enough. I quit. It is defeat without awareness. It is collapse without consciousness. But surrender is different. Surrender says, I see that this path is no longer mine. I release the fight. I trust the unfolding. Surrender is not weak. It is strong enough to let go. It is wise enough to stop resisting. It is brave enough to sit in uncertainty without needing immediate answers. Jung called this the withdrawal of projections. It's what happens when we stop demanding the world change and begin listening to what our soul has been trying to say all along. Picture this. A person falls to their knees, not out of defeat, but relief. For the first time, they are not running, not chasing, not fixing, not proving, just breathing, feeling, listening. This is the threshold of healing. This is where the unconscious finally speaks. In Jungian psychology, transformation often begins in the moment you stop. When the ego releases its white-knuckled grip on control, the self, the deeper, wiser part of you, steps forward. But here's the paradox. We've been taught that if we're not moving forward, we're falling behind, that if we stop, we'll unravel. But Jung saw that unraveling as sacred. Because what unravels is not your soul, it's the mask, the compulsive doing, the false self you've carried like armor. Letting go of that armor is not defeat. It is the beginning of something real. Stillness is not the absence of progress. It is the fertile ground where truth can finally take root. It is where the psyche reorganizes itself without the interference of willpower. When you surrender, you allow the deeper intelligence within you, the unconscious, to do what it's always known how to do: heal, not through force, but through integration. Imagine a seed in winter. It is not growing visibly, but is it dead? Number, it's preparing, resting, gathering strength for spring. You too are allowed to rest. You are allowed to pause without punishment, to stop without shame, to breathe without asking for permission. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but you cannot become until you stop pretending. You cannot hear the call of your soul until you stop shouting over it. So if you feel like giving up, try surrendering instead. Let the stillness hold you. Let your misalignment teach you. Let the healing begin, not through action, but through awareness. This is not failure. This is freedom." Part 3. The unconscious wants to speak. There's a voice inside you that doesn't speak in words. It speaks in symbols, in sensations, in strange coincidences, in dreams that leave a mark. And yet, most of us never hear it because we're too busy talking over it. Carl Jung believed the unconscious is not just a dark basement of repressed memories. It is a divine partner, a sacred intelligence that holds the blueprint of who you truly are. But it doesn't shout. It waits. And it speaks only when you're quiet enough to listen. In the Jungian view, the unconscious is the soil beneath the tree of consciousness. You may see the leaves and branches, your thoughts, plans, ambitions, but all of it grows from what lies below. And when we try to live from the surface only, always doing, always deciding, always directing, we cut ourselves off from the very root of our being. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." What you ignore doesn't disappear, it becomes your pattern. But here's the turning point. When you stop pushing, the soul begins pulling. When the ego finally pauses, when the constant doing is interrupted by a breath of silence, that's when the unconscious steps forward. Not with a list of instructions, but with a symbol, a whisper, a synchronicity, a dream. Imagine this. A woman dreams of a child lost in a forest. She wakes up crying and doesn't know why, but in therapy, the meaning unfolds. She's been neglecting her own inner child for years, lost in the noise of performance and duty. That's not just a dream. That's the unconscious speaking. And it's only heard because, for once, she wasn't too busy to notice. This is where synchronicity comes in. Jung described it as a meaningful coincidence that defies logic but resonates with the soul. You're thinking about someone and they call. You're struggling with a question and a book falls off the shelf with the answer. You feel lost, and then a symbol appears again and again in music, in graffiti, in your dreams. Is it random? Jung said no. It's the outer world mirroring the inner one. But here's the catch. Synchronicities don't arrive when you're chasing. They appear when you're still. The unconscious is not here to be managed, it's here to be related to. It doesn't demand control, it longs for connection, and like a wild animal, it will not come near if it senses judgment or noise. That's why so many of us miss it. We expect spiritual insight to arrive through a megaphone. Instead, it shows up as a flicker, a tug in your gut, a line in a poem that won't leave you. Stillness creates the space for that subtle voice to emerge, and the more you listen, the louder it becomes. Not in volume, but in clarity. Because this voice, it knows what the ego forgets. It knows your path. It knows your pain. It knows what you're becoming. Carl Jung didn't ask people to analyze their soul. He asked them to befriend it, to pay attention to the images it sends. to treat the unconscious not as a problem to be solved, but as a guide to be followed. So if you've been dreaming strange dreams lately, if you've noticed a symbol repeating, if life has felt oddly timed, eerily poetic, don't dismiss it. That may be your soul pulling you closer to truth, but it can only lead when you're finally willing to stop trying to lead yourself. Part 4. Stillness awakens the shadow. You say you want peace, but every time silence arrives, you run. You reach for the phone, turn on the noise, fill your calendar. Why? Because stillness is not empty. Stillness reveals, and for many, that's terrifying. As Carl Jung taught, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, just to avoid facing their own soul. But the soul cannot be found in movement. It waits in the stillness. And when things finally slow down, when the distractions dissolve, when the persona fades, when the noise is no longer loud enough to drown it out, something begins to rise. Not a demon, not a curse, but your shadow. The parts of you were told to hide. The rage you swallowed as a child. The grief you never had permission to feel. The truths you learned were too much, too emotional, too selfish. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is not evil. It is the rejected self. It's everything that didn't fit into the good version of you. And so you buried it. But buried things don't die. They wait. And stillness is the door they walk through. You feared stillness because you feared meeting yourself. That's the truth, isn't it? You weren't scared of being alone. You were scared of what might surface when no one else is there. But what if I told you, what rises in the quiet is not your enemy, but your beginning? What if the rage, the fear, the sadness, the loneliness you feel when everything goes silent is not there to break you, but to reintroduce you to yourself? Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Well, this is that moment. Stillness is not passive. It is active receptivity. It's when the soul finally has space to speak, and the shadow finally has permission to be seen. So the next time you find yourself in silence, don't flee. Observe. What do you feel in your body? What memories surface? What judgments arise? What part of you says, I shouldn't be still, I should be doing something? That voice is the shadow talking. Not to hurt you, but to invite you. Invite you to stop performing. Invite you to grieve. Invite you to rage. Invite you to feel what you've spent decades avoiding. Because here's the secret. What you resist in silence will rule you in chaos. But what you embrace in silence will free you. Stillness is not the end of the journey. It's the beginning of truth. And once your shadow is no longer your secret, it becomes your strength. The person who no longer fears their shadow becomes untouchable, because they have nothing to hide, nothing to prove, nothing to lose. That's the power of inner stillness. It awakens not just peace, but power. So next time the world goes quiet, don't rush to fill the silence. Sit with it, breathe with it, and ask yourself, what part of me is finally asking to be seen? That's not darkness, that's you. Coming home. Part 4, the birth of wholeness. There comes a moment, after the stillness, after the unraveling, after you've sat in the quiet and faced your shadow, when something unexpected begins to grow. Not ambition, not desire, but clarity. And from that clarity, wholeness is born. Carl Jung called this process individuation. The sacred journey of becoming who you truly are, not who the world told you to be. It's not self-improvement, it is self-return. You don't chase, you listen. You don't perform, you respond. You don't hustle to prove your worth. You move because it feels aligned. This is the turning point, where doing less doesn't mean you're giving up. It means you're tuning in. Because in the absence of noise, you start to hear what's always been speaking. Yourself. Not your ego. Not your persona. Not the desperate need to be seen, liked, admired. But your essence. The unchanging part of you that doesn't need a mask to exist. Jung believed that the psyche seeks integration, not perfection. He said, "I'd rather be whole than good." Because good is a social performance, but whole is a spiritual state. And wholeness doesn't come from doing more. It comes from welcoming back every lost piece of yourself. The part that was silenced. The part that was shamed. The part that was too bold, too honest, too emotional, too much. Wholeness is not a destination. It is a reunion. A moment when you look at every fracture in your soul and say, "You belong." There is no more inner war. You stop choosing between who you are and who you're supposed to be. You stop fighting your impulses, editing your emotions, or hiding your wounds. You simply live. From truth, from presence, from peace. And that changes everything. You walk slower, you speak clearer, you love deeper. Because it's no longer a transaction. You're no longer offering yourself to be chosen. You've already chosen you. This is the birth of individuation, where the unconscious and conscious shake hands, where the ego bows to the soul, where your suffering becomes your teacher, and your silence becomes your sanctuary. Integration, not improvement, is the goal. Because you were never broken, only scattered, only rushed, only conditioned to abandon yourself in the name of being enough. But now, you remember. You remember that you are not here to chase worth. You are here to live it. And that is what happens when you finally stop doing for validation and start being from integration. You become whole. Not because you added something, but because you finally stopped running from who you are. So breathe, be still, and let your wholeness rise. Part 6. When you stop chasing, life starts speaking. Have you ever noticed that the most meaningful signs in your life only appeared after you stopped trying to force things? You weren't pushing, you weren't chasing, you weren't performing, you were simply still. And then life began to whisper. Jung called this synchronicity, the mysterious way the outer world mirrors the inner world. It's not coincidence, it's connection between your soul and the soul of the universe. There's a famous story Carl Jung told. He was working with a woman who was stuck, rational, logical, armored by intellect. She was describing a dream about a golden scarab when suddenly, in the middle of the session, a real scarab beetle tapped against the window. This insect, rare for that region and season, became a living symbol. In that moment, something cracked open in her. The scarab became the bridge between her mind and her soul. Not because Jung planned it, not because she worked harder, but because something deeper was finally ready. That's the power of not chasing. When you stop doing, you stop interrupting. You make room for life to speak. How many miracles have passed you by because you were too busy proving, fixing, managing, worrying? How many signs were trying to reach you, but found your spirit unavailable? Jung believed that the unconscious doesn't scream, it whispers. And the world does the same. It doesn't reward noise. It reflects stillness. When you finally slow down, you notice the patterns. You catch the signal in the silence. You feel the shift in the energy of a room. You sense the yes or the no before a word is spoken. That is not laziness. That is attunement. It's your soul syncing with a rhythm deeper than the ego. Carl Jung didn't just study the psyche. He studied the symbols, the dreams, the moments that couldn't be explained by logic but made perfect sense to the heart. And he knew synchronicity is the universe's way of guiding you without controlling you. It's grace, but grace only arrives when there is space. You don't have to chase. You have to stop blocking. Stop overthinking. Stop overworking. Stop over-efforting your life into something it was never meant to be. Because the answer was never outside of you. It was waiting for the moment you got quiet enough to hear it. So if you're tired, maybe don't try harder. Try softer. Try letting go. Try listening instead of fixing. Try being instead of proving. And you'll notice the world isn't silent. It's been speaking the whole time, but only now. Are you still enough to hear? You were not born to perform. You were not sent here to produce. You are not a task list. You are not a machine. You are a soul, and your becoming was never meant to be measured in output. Carl Jung understood this. He spent his life reminding us, you are not what you do. You are what you are. But somewhere along the way, you were taught to measure your worth in motion, to equate busyness with meaning, to fear stillness, because stillness felt like failure. But what if stillness isn't a pause in the journey? What if it is the journey? What if doing nothing was the most sacred act of all? Not because you're giving up, not because you're lazy, but because, for the first time in a long time, you are ready to listen. Listen to the voice beneath the noise, to the body you've ignored, to the dreams that come when the calendar clears, to the you that has been waiting, just beyond all the things you thought you had to be. Stillness is not absence, it is presence, at its purest. It is not escape, it is return to your essence, to your breath, to your soul's own rhythm. When you stop chasing, you start receiving. When you stop fixing, you start feeling. When you stop proving, you start being. This is the paradox Jung knew intimately. Doing less doesn't make you smaller. It makes you clearer. Because only in that clarity can individuation begin. Only in that sacred nothingness can wholeness take shape. Wholeness is not built with effort. It unfolds with attention, with quiet, with intention. So what do you do now? Nothing. But not the nothing of apathy, not the nothing of despair, the nothing of presence. Let your next step be a breath. Let your next action be waiting. Let your next yes be real, because you finally gave yourself the silence to feel it. You don't need to do more. You need to do less with more soul, more awareness, more reverence, more willingness to hear the sacred in the silence. The world will try to pull you back, into motion, into proving, into performance, but you now carry something it can't touch, the memory of stillness. And in that stillness, you remembered yourself. So here's the practice. Not striving, not controlling, but honoring, sitting, listening, becoming. Your life is not a race. It's a ritual, a ceremony of awareness. And the most powerful breakthroughs don't come when you push. They come when you finally say, I don't need to do more. I just need to stop betraying myself. If this message touched something in you, comment below. I choose stillness. Let's see how many of us are ready to reclaim the sacred practice of doing nothing and trust that in that nothing, everything real will begin.